Welcome to the Author Blurb podcast. I'm your host, Eric Maynard. You can find me at authorblurb.com. You can find my books at eaofmaynard.com. And you can find all these authors, including Richard Hewitt, who comes on the show, at the profile sheet or the author list at authorblurb.com. Now, first off, thank you as always for being here. If this is your first time, welcome. I hope you find authors that I'm introducing here that interest you, that brings out new books that you want to learn about and want to read, and hopefully share as well. So the only thing I ever ask is you share this show with people, you share the books you find from these authors with people, and you feel free to let me know what you think. Other than that, enjoy the show is really all I want. So today I speak with Richard Hewitt, and we go through discussing his 5 books that he has, how the fact of he wrote them all while he was in Central Asia, the ties that he found between the religions, and even the fact of he has a running theory that seems to be showing some promise with the lost tribe or the Jewish lost tribe, or forgive me, I'm horrible about some of this stuff, but it's becoming quite understanding, quite picked up, and from how it sounds, it's becoming something that people are really looking into and finding information behind to use in favor of his theory there. I'm personally right now reading his book, Come Home, and you'll hear me mention it. Unfortunately, I'm reading it very slowly just because I have 2 kids, a 1-year-old and a almost 5-year-old, and well, anybody with kids know well enough, they take a lot of time. I love spending it with them, but sometimes you pick and choose what you're going to do, and well, I enjoy my kids most times. But anyways, enjoy the show. Listen to Richard and I have a pretty good discussion about his books. He goes into great details. It's a adventure listening to him talk. So thank you, and let's get to the show right now. So I'm here with Richard Hewitt. Richard's an author of 5 books. I'm reading one of the books now, and if my kids give me a break at some time, I might actually finish it soon. But Richard, I appreciate you coming on. I'm enjoying your book right now so far, Coming Home. If you can help me out, I want people to get to know a bit more about you, about your books, and what's going on with you. Can you tell everybody about yourself?
Yes, I was born in Santa Monica, California, grew up here, and had really an experience with God that was through Scripture. I call the book the script instead of the Bible, but and was very, very attracted to it, not within a religious context or a church or synagogue, but just a kind of a grassroots theology or hunger, I guess I should call it that, and developed my own theology from what I was reading. And that really kind of defined my life and defines who I am to this day. I ended up going to UC Santa Barbara for college, and for me, it was at that time it was a wild party college, but for me it was like a seminary because I was just learning how to put into practice the things I was reading and meet this invisible God that we can't see or touch, but felt like He was always present. And then I went to college in 1984, and I started feeling this call. Actually, there was a time where I was studying chemistry in the library at the university, and I put down, closed the university book, opened my Bible, started reading from Luke, and was just so impressed by God and God's love. Walked around the library, and while I was doing that, I was in a state of prayer, and I walked by a map of the world, and the mountains of Central Asia kind of just jumped out and grabbed my heart and pulled me in. And so in 1994, I got married after college. In 1994, my wife and I moved over to Kyrgyzstan, and I lived there for 20 years. So after that, after the mountains grabbed my heart and kind of pulled me in, I just knew I needed to go. I dropped out of university at that time. That was 1987. And the Soviet Union, the mountains really that grabbed my heart were the Tian Shan and Pamir mountains, which are part of the Soviet Union, or were part of the Soviet Union at that time. And I couldn't get in. I couldn't get into Iran or Afghanistan. And I ended up going to northern Pakistan and meeting some of just the Central Asians, the minority groups that lived there. It was an amazing time for me just to, again, step out in faith and not really see or know where my foot was going to land, but get caught again and again by God and God's goodness. And it was an absolutely amazing trip. I was on the border between Pakistan and Afghanistan and met the Mujahideen at that time. And again, you know, we can look at them through the eyes of the media, or we could look at them as people. And one of the things that happened to me while I was there, I walked by a man that was weeping at the gravesite, a small gravesite. So it was obviously a child who had been buried. And I went up to meet some villagers, some friends that I'd met. And several hours later, I came back and the man was in the same position, still weeping over this child. And it just hit me how much he was like me and how his humanity just really struck me. And I really developed a heart, and I could say a love for Central Asians while I was in Pakistan. In 91, so a few years later, the Soviet Union fell apart, and I went and moved over to Kyrgyzstan, a small mountain country, in 1994. Was there until 2013, so almost 20 years.
Okay. So while you're there, were you just starting to write your book? Because I know you have 5 books total. Or did you, I guess, when did you actually start writing, or what got you into the writing to get the stories out?
Well, I'm actually dyslexic, and I don't consider myself very intelligent or scholastic. And I really couldn't comprehend English in my high school classes. It was just beyond me. But when I was in college, I did write an essay and got an A on it. You know, I was kind of shocked, and it was one of those things I just kind of thought it was like a fluke. But when I was in Kyrgyzstan, I started seeing some beautiful analogies and pictures that were relatable to the script, again, to the good book. And I started just writing some of them in English, and I found a translator who translated them into short stories and published them in the local newspaper. And the name of the people, again, were the Kyrgyz people. They had been nomadic before the Soviet Union, living in yurts in the high mountains. Beautiful, beautiful people, shepherds by nature. Now they've got city and they're much more urbanized. But I started writing, and this newspaper was called the Kyrgyz Spirit, and it was like the perfect paper to write for. And I just wrote some of these analogies, these stories that I saw, communicated really, again, biblical principles or scriptural principles through their nomadic lifestyle, through images that they liked, like their flag and their yurt and their culture. And the stories were really, I mean, people really liked them or really hated them. Nothing in between.
Right.
And I actually, after about this 5th or 6th story, the editor of the paper was forced to kind of kick me off the staff, and he and I remain friends to this day. But he just, the pressure from the loud minority, I'll call them that. The Kyrgyz people are Muslim and wonderful Muslim people, but there's a kind of a loud, small extremist element that won't allow for anything beyond what they see, the way they see the world. And again, I don't want to classify the Kyrgyz people like that, because they're wonderful people.
All right. So was Coming Home your first book that you wrote, or what was your first book?
You know, my first book, interestingly enough, was a child's book, And what happened is, I'll step back again a few years and say, right before I came to Kyrgyzstan, my aunt knew that I was kind of following this voice of God that I had heard in the library. And she said to me, she said, why are you going over there? We need people like you here. We've got poor people that need help, and they've got their own God, and why they don't need you. And I really had to kind of come back to God and just say, you know, God, I'm not going there to change anyone's religion, or I'm not even really going there to tell them about you or anything. I just feel like you're leading me there. And I felt like the two words God had put on my heart were love and listen. So it wasn't like proclaim and declare or anything like that. So
Right.
I just kind of came back to God in prayer with that challenge that my aunt had given me, like, why are you going over there? And I actually came to the point where it's like, God, if Yeshua, let me call him that, or Jesus is the Messiah, as I'm reading, as I believe from what I'm reading in the script, then you've got to show it to me beyond, outside of Christianity and Judaism, and you've got to just show me your book's real and that this is true. And I went over to Kyrgyzstan. The first thing you see when you get off the plane is the flag, and the flag has this. It's a beautiful flag. It's a red flag with the sun, and in the middle of the sun is this. It's actually the top of their yurt. So I think for those of you who don't know what a yurt is, it's a nomadic dwelling, kind of like a teepee, except it's made from felt instead of skins, and it's instead of kind of having that triangular shape, it's more of a dome shape. And right at the top in the center is the smoke hole, where the smoke comes out, and I learned very quickly that it's kind of the most holy symbol of Kyrgyz in their culture. And so I started asking them, why is this holy to you? And they would say things that had these beautiful messianic connections. Like, one of the things they said is, it's the light of our world. And Yeshua, Jesus, whoever you want to, whatever name, Isa, whatever name you want to call him, he says in one place in the book of John, I am the light of the world. So I thought, the first time I asked that question, why is this important to you? Why is it on your flag? Why is it so important? They gave me an answer that related directly to something Jesus had said about himself. And then the second person, I went into the next year and I said, why is this symbol so important to you? And he said, well, these kind of like lattice walls that are the lower part of the yurt, he said they represent women and girls in our society. And then the beams that go up to the tunduk, the smoke hole, represent men. And the tunduk, or the smoke hole at the top, represents God, or our elder, one of our elders. So there's this kind of like God, human, some sort of top of society. And again, that's a picture that's painted a couple times in Scripture, that the Messiah is the head of the body, and all of the humans that are part of the community are like different members of the body. So again, that was just another kind of messianic image that came across really powerfully. And then the third time I went into a yurt, again, same question: why is this so important to you? I'd learned enough of the language by that time that I could ask. And the third person, the third owner of the yurt, said to me, well, this is the one piece, the smoke hole at the top is the one piece that holds the whole yurt together. And without that piece, the whole thing falls to pieces. And it's true that the tunduk at the very top just holds it all together. All the pieces are connected to it. And again, Jesus, there's a few comments about Jesus in Scripture where he's called the chief cornerstone. And the chief cornerstone in the building is the kind of like the piece you set first, and all the pieces kind of measured out and connected to that. So here I was, and as far as you can get from the Judeo-Christian world, and seeing these beautiful symbols of the Messiah, and that question I had with God, like, if this is true, if he's really the Messiah or the Son of God, then I've got to be able to see these in cultures that are totally detached and totally different. And I did that right from the beginning. That prayer was answered. So my first book, you asked back to the question, my first book was just very simple, like pictures of the yurt and the tunduk with simple little descriptions underneath, maybe sometimes a verse. And I left it on an editor's desk, and he didn't have time to look at it for several months. And then it stayed there. I went and visited him a few times. He didn't do anything with it. And then one day he picked it up and read it, and he called me and he said, "This is amazing. We've got to publish this." And he published it, and I got a famous author to write the foreword to it, and
Nice.
in Kyrgyzstan, and it hit the newspapers. And again, this loud minority put a lot of pressure on the famous author, and he made me withdraw his statement. Again, I didn't have to do it, but just out of respect for him, I did withdraw it. And ever since that book came out, I've had a nemesis. Actually, I've had a nemesis in Kyrgyzstan.
Okay,
yeah.
from a kid's book.
From a kid's book.
Interesting. Well, so what age group does that kid's book kind of focus on?
You know, I focused it on for kind of like that 8 to 10 year age, but it actually didn't end up being a kid's book. It ended up being something that the nation read at that time. That was in the 1990s.
All right.
Yeah, it was really interesting. So even though I wrote it as a kid's book, it kind of hit the main audience, main adult audience.
All right. And where did you go after that? What was your next book?
So what book did I do after that? Then it's really, really interesting. Then the Kyrgyz have a folk religion that predates Islam. And one of the big discussions in the country right now is, are we Muslim or are we followers of Tengid? Tengid would be the name of the Tengidism, really the god of that they've had throughout history. Mm-hmm. And so there's still to this day there's a lot of worshipers of Tengid in Kyrgyzstan. And the Kyrgyz mentality and character is such that many people are kind of followers of both. They'll go to the mosque, and then they'll go up to the mountain to a spring and pray to Tengid there. So, and in their mind, it's not hypocritical or anything like that. They're just doing their Kyrgyz thing and adopting Islam as it gets stronger and stronger. But I saw an argument at a party between a strong Muslim and a strong adherent of Tengidism. And they were really going at it, and just being me and enjoying talks about God, I wanted to jump in, and I felt like God just kind of pushed me back and said, don't get involved. And so I just watched from a distance. I watched this argument, and then again in prayer to the Lord, I just said, God, where is the connection between these two? They both are zealous for you. They're talking about you. They're both trying to defend you. They're not afraid to stand for you. Where's the middle ground? Where are you in this conversation? And as they were going at it, the man who stood for the Tengid belief, he had the old traditional Kyrgyz hat. It's a kind of a high hat, and there's 4 lines that kind of go up through it, the crossing at the top and the center. And as I stood behind him as he was talking, and I felt like his hat just kind of started to stand out towards me, kind of like the mountains did in the map several years previous. And so I knew somehow the answer to my question was in the hat, was in the symbolism of the hat. And I was pretty depressed during that time. I remember just kind of like not wanting to get out of bed for 2 weeks. But while I was in bed I kept thinking about the hat, the symbolism of the hat, and I could kind of see these again symbols that tied back to the script, to the book in some ways. And one day I just remember I felt like the Lord said, get up and write. And so I just stood up and I wrote this very small booklet. It took probably a week or 2 to write. Again, gave it to a translator, an editor. They put it out, and again quite a sensation. And again, my nemesis came against me. But that was my second book, and a lot of the Kyrgyz really liked it a lot because these symbols are important to them, and they're not just symbols. I'm tying in their symbols with the most popular book that's ever been written, and even though they don't claim to have a history to that book, there's so much in it that they do connect with. Like they know, as adherents of Tengadism and as Muslims, they know about Abraham, Isaac, and Moses. They know about David. They know about Isa, Jesus, and many of the others. So when I write these things and connect their symbols to this powerful script, a lot of them were really, really grateful. And I was able to get an audience with some wonderful people. And eventually I got invited to academic conferences, and I continued to write on some of these similarities, and was often loved and hated. There's not a lot of in between, and yeah.
I understand. What was the name of your second book then?
So it's called the Kyrgyz Kolpak.
Okay.
And the Kolpak is the name of the hat.
All right. And then you go on to your third book. Where did that come from, and what's the name of it?
So my third book is really interesting, and this is something that's probably come to define me in Kyrgyzstan more than any other. And this is probably the one that in Kyrgyzstan I'm most well known for. I was actually doing agriculture in the mountains. I've been hired by a few different organizations to go up and find out what was going on in some of the high mountain villages. And I started a seed project. I had a friend in New Mexico who got seeds from Idaho, up the high mountain valleys of Idaho, and we tried them up in the high mountain valleys of Kyrgyzstan, and we had 90% success rate, which is huge. I was working with 10 farmers at the time, and 3 of them just stood out as exceptional. And one of those 3 was a man who didn't drink, worked hard. He kind of had a good reputation in the village, and he really adopted me as his 13th child. I was an adult. I was already 28, 29 years old at that time, but age-wise, I actually was 5th in the lineup of his kids, though they continued to call me the 13th because I came last. But it was really wonderful. So I was living up there and able to be an insider in this community, learn their culture, kill the sheep, do the sacrifices with them, the prayers, weep at the graves with them, and be a part of the weddings and the births and everything, the circumcisions that take place in that culture. And as I watched and learned, I just realized, wow, there are so many similarities to the ancient Hebrews. Again, to Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, Moses, just so many similarities. And I'll give one really odd similarity. It's like the Kyrgyz, let me just say, Jacob, the prophet Jacob from scripture in the book of Genesis, he wrestles with an angel at one point, and he holds on to the angel until the angel blesses him, and the angel says, "Let me go," and Jacob says, "No, not until you bless me." And finally, the angel blesses him, actually changes his name from Jacob to Israel, so that's where we get the name Israel to this day. And Israel means one who wrestles with God and overcomes. And then Jacob, I guess, still didn't let him go, and the angel touches his hip, and he becomes lame. And then it says, "For this reason, the children of Israel don't eat the tendon on the hip to this day." And the Kyrgyz will eat everything on the sheep when they kill a lamb. They eat things that I can't digest. I started drinking vodka when I was in Kyrgyzstan because I couldn't digest. I needed the extra help to digest some of the things I was eating. But they don't eat this one muscle, this one tendon on the hip of the sheep. And I've asked them several times, like, why don't you eat this? You eat everything. Why not this? And they're like, no, we can never give this to a guest. We can never serve it, never eat it. And I'm like, why not? Well, it's always been this way. That's what my father's taught me. And so you've got this really strange thing written in the script, in the good book. And then 2,000 years later, the Kyrgyz are doing the same thing, or actually 3,000 years later, doing the same thing. And it's just odd. And so I started making a collection of these type of similarities, and my list went from 20 to 50 to 70. And when it got to 70, I started asking God, okay, God, there was a time where the Kyrgyz had to have crossed paths with the Hebrews. And I looked at this, I was looking at Kyrgyz history and examining again the script, the different tribes that lived with the Hebrews. So you had the Edomites and the Ammonites and the Hittites and all these different people. And I looked at them and I couldn't find any good, academic, scholastic type of material there. And I kept asking God. Another year passed. My list went from 70 to 120, and it was just more and more confirmations that they'd been there. And then I was up in the high mountains. I was drinking fermented horse milk in a yurt, and the shepherds started telling me the story of their hero, whose name is Manas. He's kind of their great legendary hero. They have epics, and they'll sing these songs for days about him and some of his feats and what they've done, what he did, and how he was born, how he got married. And as I was listening to him tell the story, I was like, wow, this is really similar to David at this section, because he was a shepherd boy who killed a giant and became king, and his best friend was the son of the king who wanted to kill him. So again, in the script, in the good book, you've got David's best friend Jonathan is the son of Saul, who was the king who wanted to kill David. So, there are these patterns that were fitting. All the names were different, but the patterns were the same. And some of them were so specific that I didn't feel like they could be typical archetypes. And so, I just kept listening to the story. And then there's a story where it sounded like Rebecca and Isaac, where they got married, and when he was late and she couldn't have children, and they prayed, and Manasseh's mother was barren, couldn't have children. Just listening again to all these stories, and then the shepherd stopped telling me the story, and he said, "Do you know the name of Manasseh's father?" And I said, "No." And he leaned forward and he said, "Jacob." And when he said Jacob, I thought, Jacob.
Mm-hmm.
And I went back to the good book. I read Genesis, and like the one place where I hadn't looked for the place where the Kyrgyz could have had some sort of connection with the Israelites, the Hebrews, ancient Hebrews, was within the 12 tribes of Israel. And one of the 12 tribes is the tribe of Manasseh. And in Kyrgyz language, you don't have a male name that ends with a soft sound. So Manasseh would become Manas. And their hero is Manas, the son of Jacob or Jacob. And if you looked at the script, Manasseh is not actually the son of Jacob. He's the grandson, because you've got Jacob and then you've got Joseph. And Joseph goes to Egypt, and he has two sons in Egypt, and one of them is Manasseh. The older is Manasseh. But in the script, Jacob goes to Joseph, and he adopts the two sons of Joseph as his own. He goes to Joseph and he says, "These two sons that were born to you in Egypt are now my sons, and they're going to be called by my name, just as my other sons, Reuben and Simeon, are called by my name." And then Jacob says to Joseph, "Any other children you have after this are your children." So the biblical Manasseh becomes the son of Jacob. And the Kyrgyz have that same tradition to this day, where a grandfather will adopt his first grandchild and make his first grandchild his own son, and then there's all his other grandchildren are the children of their parents. So
Well, that's interesting.
It's amazing. It's amazing, Eric. Some of the things over there, it was like a puzzle that just kept unfolding and unfolding.
So, and there's a lot there to unpack as well, but it sounds like behind each book there's a long story, so we still have two more books to get through here. So let's go to the fourth book, because and then we can touch a little bit on all of them as well at when we wrap up. But
Okay.
what was the fourth book that you ended up going to after that?
Okay, so then I really got a reputation in Kyrgyzstan, and I presented. The third book was actually a collection of essays, academic essays that I presented over probably 5 or 6 years in Kyrgyzstan, and then I got a reputation for that. I actually wrote more than 5 books because a number of them weren't translated into English. So I'm trying to think. Okay, but. I wrote after that. I wrote a screenplay, and it was really fun to write. Enjoyed it. Few people that read it really enjoyed it, but I had a friend who was a movie producer over there, and he couldn't pitch it to anyone because he said this isn't Muslim enough for me to pitch it to Muslims because you've got good and bad Muslims in it, and then it's not Jewish enough for me to pitch it to the Jewish community because you've got good and bad Jews in it, and it's not Christian enough for me to pitch to the Christian community. So he depended on finances and financial supporters, sponsors for his work, and he couldn't find anything. He said, "You're just falling into this little niche." And I wrote, I had people that were adherents of Tengadism in the story too. So I loved writing that. Totally enjoyed it. I don't know if I'm too sensitive at this point, but there's a time where I put it down and picked it up again and started reading it, and kind of felt a little teary-eyed at one point, and I'm thinking, like this is fiction, and I wrote the whole thing, and yet I got a little teary-eyed at my own characters or something. So that was probably my fourth in the English department of my English books, and then the last one. But one thing that was helpful about writing that, actually, after I moved back to the US, I met 2 Koreans who wanted to write a movie about Kyrgyzstan. And because I had a script under my belt, they brought me on board and helped. And I was a co-author on a movie that was produced in Kyrgyzstan and screened. So that was fun.
Oh, that's interesting. As they say, you never know where things like these will lead you.
It's really interesting, yeah, and it was a really fascinating project.
So now we come to your fifth book, and I'm assuming this is Coming Home?
Yes.
Come Home, yes. I don't know why I keep saying Coming Home. Come Home. So on Come Home, this is the one I'm actually familiar with since you sent it to me and I've been reading. Like I said, I've gone through the first 3 chapters, and if I can get my daughter to take enough naps and my kid to let me read long enough.
Yeah.
So with those factors, I'm working on getting through it, but it seems interesting so far of what I've read about it. Now, with this, you seem to tie in a lot of different things going to the Lost Tribe, which you mentioned earlier, going to the different traditions and this and that. What got you writing this book here? Because it sounds like you're here in the States when you wrote it.
Right. So I don't know if you can pick up from the conversation we've had already, but how do I say this? I wasn't sponsored by any organizations, so I had the freedom to just walk with God as faithfully as I felt like I could. I had my failings and my selfishness and my greed at times too, and definitely felt, I don't want to. Let me just say this, I guess. While I was over there, I really kind of had a theology that developed, I believe, from the script and the context that it developed in was in Kyrgyzstan. And some of my biggest opponents were not just this loud minority that I talked about already, but were actually Christian missionaries that were living over there, or people that were being salaried by Christian missionaries. And so Come Home, the book Come Home, is actually about, it's trying to put all my my theology and my experiences into one package, and that includes the lost tribes. So yes, I believe that the Kyrgyz, or at least an element within Kyrgyz culture, are from the tribe of Manasseh, and there's a whole history that I knew nothing about. It's actually pretty popular within Judaism, and I'm not Jewish. I didn't know about it. Most Christians don't have any inkling what it is, but it's a really big topic in Scripture, that, again, for some reason, like, Christians have a blind spot to it, but it's pretty well thought out and discussed in Judaism. And what happened was King David had a united confederation, really, of 12 tribes, and that was passed on to his son Solomon, who was supposedly the wisest man who ever lived. And then after Solomon's son Rehoboam took over the 12 tribes as king, and he made a statement that just caused 10 of the tribes to break away. He said, I'm gonna work you and tax you as hard as my father, even harder. And these 12 tribes are like, well, then we don't have any part of you, house of David. So even though this Rehoboam was the grandson of David, they called it the house of David. And so these 10 tribes in the north just broke away. And to this day, so actually what you see happen in the script after that is that the southern tribes are called Judah, and that's where we get what we know as today's Jews, from these southern tribes. And the northern tribes really are called Israel after that time, or Jacob, or Joseph, because they're often considered the descendants of Joseph. Sometimes they're called Ephraim, by one of Joseph's sons. So if you look closely and read script with attention to some of these names, you really start to see the distinction more and more. And after I had that experience that I told you about on the mountain with my fermented horse milk and Jacob, I came back and I really felt like I was reading a new book. It's a book that I'd read dozens and dozens of times. And I came back to the book after that experience, and I felt like I was verses that just stood out in a completely different light than they had before. So I've been trying to work with, why is this important? Why were these tribes lost? Why God got mad at them and said he's going to scatter them to the ends of the earth, to all nations. And then at the end of times, he's going to bring them back to the land. And again, that's standard Jewish theology. And Judaism, actually, they pray for those tribes to return. And Jews often believe that Messiah won't come until all the tribes return. So there's a lot of rabbis that are out there looking how to find and bring back these tribes, so that Mashiach, the Jewish name for the Messiah, can come. And it's really interesting. I've met some of these wonderful Jewish rabbis who are out there looking. Some of them have talked with me and tried to understand more. And they have added, a number of these have quietly added Kyrgyz to the list of lost tribes of Israel.
All right. Now, I know one thing that you mentioned in the book, at least that I caught so far, was you also related one of the American Indian tribes, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
And the gentleman you showed this image of an American Indian, or Native American, whatever the proper term is,
right.
When you showed him that image, he swore that he was actually one of his people,
right,
and not from another continent.
Right.
And you kind of brought up the question of, could they also be part of the lost tribe?
Right. So in the early part of America's history. There was actually a time when many of the settlers, the whites coming into America, looked at the Native Americans and believed that they were from the tribes of Israel. And I can't remember all the names of the authors from that time. James Adair is one that stands out. But Thomas Jefferson also got caught up in this conversation and was starting to wonder. And some of the reasons why they did that is because the way their priests are formed, I think we might call them shamans or something, but some of the ceremonies, there's a breastplate that's very similar to the breastplate that Aaron wore in the script. And then there's also the name Yah. So Yah is a Hebrew name for God. And I think that there's some, Native American chants that would go, Yah, Yah, and that Yahweh is like the holy name of God in Hebrew. And so, so that discussion really was starting in the 1600s and 1700s. And then it kind of died down. But one of the offshoots of that is actually Mormonism. Mormonism is a religion that kind of really believes that the Native Americans were from one of the tribes of Israel. And I don't know too much about Mormonism, but I do know that aspect. And I have talked about Mormons on this topic. But my friend was Navajo. So again, these settlers were seeing tribes that were on the eastern side of the U.S. And my friend is Navajo. He came over and presented an academic paper in Kyrgyzstan, and the Kyrgyz absolutely loved him because they felt like their long lost brother had returned. They have in their epic, the Epic of Manas, they have ambassadors that go to Hungary and to Iran and to the other side of the Himalayas. And all those ambassadors come back, but there were some ambassadors that went to the deep, and those ambassadors never came back. So a lot of these Kyrgyz scholars believe that the ambassadors that went to the deep and never came back were Native Americans.
All right.
And again, like the Kyrgyz people can distinguish just from a photo, they can distinguish a Kyrgyz from a Kazakh, and for most people it'd be impossible to distinguish the two, but they can. They just, little differences in cheekbone or what. And I took a picture of a Navajo and showed some of my Kyrgyz friends, and they're like, no, this guy is Kyrgyz. He's not Kazakh. He's Kyrgyz. And I said, no, he's Navajo. And there's kind of the Mongolian spot in the back. Are you familiar with that? It's a little blue spot that a lot of babies are born with.
No.
No. Okay. It kind of goes from Central Asia through Siberia. Japanese often have it, and then comes down into a lot of America's native populations. And it's just this really interesting genetic marker that exists, and it goes all. You find it down in Peru and among the Navajo. My boys are both adopted from Kyrgyzstan, and my son just had this really big one that lasted a couple of years. And,
well, that's interesting.
Yeah.
So, to kind of tie it all together, it sounds like everything you've written is based around the Kyrgyzstan people, the religion, things like that.
Right.
With all that going on, you seem to find a lot of comparison between Christianity and a bit of the different symbolisms that you saw while you were there. Do you feel like in your books explains how there is a strong connection and tie to all these religions, and going back to the lost tribes, going back to where the House of David, I guess you could say, or those stories where they originated, that the Kyrgyzstans, the Israelites, and Christian Jews are all tied together then?
Yeah, let me first of all say good question. First of all, let me say that I'm not a promoter of Christianity at all.
Right.
At all. I, I, there's a lot of things about Christianity that really, really bother me. And again, like some of those who opposed me the most were Christians in that country. Having said that, I think there's a lot of good in Christianity too. But we just had I am hosting this small little thing. We call it the Lost Tribes Cafe. And we just had the last two meetings. We talked about Messianic Shintoism. So Messianic Judaism are these Jews who believe that Yeshua, Jesus, is the Messiah, but they don't want to have anything to do with Christianity because they're Jews. And Christianity is just a completely different culture. It's not their religion. It's not their traditions. They have these beautiful symbolic traditions like the Passover, which point, again, beautifully to the Messiah and Yeshua's sacrifice. And so they don't convert to Christianity. And now what we're seeing is in Kyrgyzstan, we have these Isa Muslims, so they're Muslims who believe in Jesus, and they don't want to have anything to do with Christianity, but they love the script and they love the Messiah, and they call him Isa Mesih because that's the Arabic name for Jesus the Messiah. And now what we're seeing is in Shintoism in Japan, there's a Messianic Shinto movement. So these are people who believe that Shintoism came from the ancient Israelites as they came to Japan. And there's an author, I think his name is Joseph Elderberg, who believes that these ancient Israelites passed through Kyrgyzstan en route to Japan. He wrote a book, and then on the topic. So they look at the original Shintoism as a kind of a Hebrew type or a biblical, let me say that, a biblical type of belief system, and they don't believe they need to change it. They do believe they need to purify it because it had been, up until the 8th century, it had been a monotheistic faith, and then it became a polytheistic. So they're trying to, work out things. Okay, we have a character who's very similar to Isaac, and we change that character into a god, but instead of him being a god, he's actually a ancestor and should be honored as an ancestor, but not worshipped as a god. So they're working out some of those things, but they believe that Isa or Yesu, or if you go even further back to the ancient origins of Shintoism, they call him Uzamasa. So they're just trying to figure out, again, how they're just coming back to him and trying to purify Shintoism. So yeah, it's absolutely amazing for me, Eric, seeing how all nations and all religions do seem to tie back into this amazing script that is our planet's. I'm going to call it our planet's script, and again, it's the most controversial book on our planet, and there's a lot of places where it's been banned, but it's a powerful, powerful book, and I think it goes way beyond Christianity and Judaism. I think it's reaching into all cultures, all nations.
Well, I can believe that very much. So, and I agree with you on there's good and bad of every religion.
Yeah.
Well, to me, the organized side of things kind of muddy it all up, but real religion tends to have a good base behind it. And it sounds like you found the thread that links a lot of everything together, which makes me now really want to try to get through Come Home so I can see that thread a little clearer.
Yeah.
So I don't want to take up all your time today, and I might just have you come back on again for us to have more of a discussion about this.
Okay. Yeah.
Because, like I said, it seems like there's a whole lot more to unpack in there.
Yeah.
But right now, if people want to find you, they can go to authorblurb.com, where I have all your links that you've given me. There's your bio there.
Right.
There's everything I have, which there's going to be a link to in the show notes. Where do you prefer people to go find you?
Right now I don't have a big social presence. I do a little bit on Facebook when I just have a thought that I want to throw out there. But really, the only place to really find me is on Amazon's author page, and you can find me there. We are doing these Lost Tribe Cafe meetings, and if people are interested in joining that, I can give you my email for that, and people could hook up and link on that. It's just a casual conversation with people that are doing stuff that's Lost Tribes related.
Well, it sounds good. Yeah, if you can send me that link, I'll include it in the or your email for that. I'll include it in the show notes so people can reach out to you about it, because I'm sure people are going to want to know more about it as well. So besides getting your books, they can reach out and talk to you a bit more. So with that being said, I really do appreciate you being here. Like I said, we could easily talk much more, it seems like.
Yeah.
But I'm going to end it now for everybody else. If you can hold on for me for just a moment, I'm going to talk to you a bit more.
Okay, great. Thank you, Eric. Thank you.
Thank you. So thank you for making it this far. Remember, you can go to authorblurb.com where there's plenty of stuff there for you to find. Enjoy another author. Enjoy finding that book that you love. So take the time, do me a favor, share, subscribe, enjoy the show, and tell others. Thank you.